When we first began planning the summit, it was important that we included a general session. And you're about to hear from several visionary leaders whose thoughts, I hope, help to knit together what we have been doing here today and who inspire us all to take the summit forward in our own lives as leaders. I'm really delighted to introduce my friend Sarah Ruger, who directs free expression initiatives for the Charles Koch Institute and Foundation. She's a passionate advocate for open inquiry, for Enlightenment principles, and for free speech rights. Prior to her work promoting peaceful pluralism and civil discourse, she built grant partnerships in higher education and managed donor relations for the Foundation. She also previously managed external relations for the Institute for Humane Studies and connected academic research on human and societal well-being with opportunities for public policy impact. She's written for a variety of outlets, including USA Today and Inside Higher Education. And on a personal note, we have been involved in this since the very beginning, and every effort like this, if you're talking candid wisdom, leaders among leaders, has some challenging and difficult moments when you don't know exactly where it's going to go. And Sarah was an unstinting advocate and a roller of boulders up hills, and I really appreciated the push and the faith in what ultimately brought us here. So with that, over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Mike, and for the opportunity to be involved with what has been a transformational project for us to get to learn from and to learn alongside you in experiencing. So I can't add a lot of wisdom to what's already been covered today because there's nothing I can say more effectively than the likes of Keisar Khan and Miss Ali this morning and any number of other amazing folks that we've heard from. What I can do and what I do for a living is use the philanthropic resources at my disposal to elevate and empower the voices and the people with the ideas that can heal the hurt that we see in our communities and address some of the considerable challenges that are before us. So I'll just take as few minutes as possible to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the spirit of an invitation to join us in that endeavor, to help teach us in that endeavor, because we've got a lot of lessons to learn, to challenge us when we get it wrong. We need that from everyone in this room. That's why I'm so excited that it's such an incredibly diverse group here and folks coming from such different perspectives. And in part, these remarks are just a little bit to address the question I get with a lot of the folks when we come here. It's kind of like, why is Coke here? Like, what are you guys? Usually a little bit of skepticism. So I'll start with just a little bit of the lessons that brought us here in the full spirit of intellectual humility, because we're here mostly because we've done a lot of things wrong and haven't always been as impactful as we'd like in a positive sense, but we want to change that moving forward. So we got involved in this space initially by defending First Amendment rights in a relatively narrow context in higher education and with respect to press freedom and in the arts, because our hope was that by preserving those mediums for the media for open inquiry and free expression, that ultimately we'd see a more peaceful, pluralistic society. But we've basically learned in these current highly polarized, divisive times that that's a really wrong assumption, that more free expression is automatically going to lead you to this more peaceful, more collaborative society. So we started investing in programs at the K-12 and college level to help equip students and young people with the skills they need to engage productively in dialogues across divides and to be peaceful and to not have fear when they encounter the other or somebody different. And that taught us a lot, but then Charlottesville happened. And that was just such a punch in the face to have to grapple with the very real harms that unfettered free speech can cause. It really made clear that we're dealing with offensive ideas that are not easy to combat and that cause deep divides in everybody's backyard. And we have to play a role in providing the resources necessary to heal those fractures, to find what's causing that level of intolerance, and ultimately to bring the groups of people together who have the right ideas for how to deal with them. So in response to that, and in response to the lessons that we've learned from this project, we've launched a new initiative. It's called the Courageous Collaborations Initiative, and it's going to be focused on three things in the spirit of creating this collaborative environment where we can come together to solve the most intractable problems facing our country. So we're going to be funding original research on the roots of intolerance, really treating this like the public health crisis that it is. Where is it coming from? How does it originate? And what are the prescriptions that help address it? There's actually a lot of great research out there already, so a lot of our work will focus on bringing the people together across sectors and across disciplines in the academy to apply their considerable knowledge to these problems. And today is a representation of that in a lot of ways. Two, we're going to be funding platforms and original content that demonstrate that it is actually possible to have these kinds of conversations. They're taking place around the country every day. People are still capable of having dialogues across divides, and we want to try to help break that, what seems to be a cycle of cynicism that's building up in the country, where people watch the news and think that the only way to deal with this is through violent conflict and through censorship. And then lastly, we're going to make as many grants as possible to empower social entrepreneurs who have identified the tools, the best practices, the creative ideas to heal the fractures, to bridge the divides, and just basically try to come alongside them and take what's working in their backyard and scale it to whoever needs it and wants it around the country. So that's where this concept of unlikely or courageous collaborations becomes so important, because and it's reflected in the structure of our project. We can only do that if we're practicing what we preach and working with people that may be hesitant to work with us and that we may be hesitant to work with because we disagree on any number of other issues. But by doing that, we learn from each other. We're able to challenge ourselves and improve our effectiveness across the board, and we're just eager to do more of that. So please, find us later and give us the hard questions, give us the hard feedback, and then more importantly, give us the solutions you have in mind that can help address some of the problems that we're identifying today. And I'll just end with a note of thanks to the person I have the pleasure to introduce next, and it's to Mr. Bob Boisture, who's the president of Fetzer Institute, who's one of the very first partners who were willing to come alongside us, funding partners, come alongside us in this endeavor, who demonstrated the courage it takes to jump into these highly difficult and divisive conversations. We've just learned so much from you all, and in particular, your focus on the power of individual self-actualization, the power of personal transformation to transform the world positively, and the power of love and compassion to do so at a time when it's so desperately needed. And Bob and Fetzer really model what it looks like to stand for love in the face of deep division. And that sounds so simple, but up against something as tough to heal as hate, it's going to take something as radical as love to do that. And these are all principles that we've long stood for, but have no idea how to actually support, and we're really learning from you in so many ways about how to do that. So thank you, and we're all lucky to hear more from you on how you are.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much for those very kind words and for your willingness to reach out to us and invite a collaboration. We're really excited, and as I will come back to in my comments, I think we need a lot more of this. So hopefully we will see that. Sarah said I'm the love guy, so let me just say I've been in this job for 5 years, but for the 35 years before that, I was in advocacy work with nonprofits in Washington on the liberal side, working on issues like child care, child health, juvenile justice reform, raising tobacco taxes, defending the advocacy rights of organizations receiving federal funds. I think actually earlier in my career I even lobbied Senator Danforth. I say that because one of the themes I want to share in my comments is that, as you said more eloquently than I will, we're up against hate and we needed a force as powerful as love. A word about Fetzer, which will provide a little, I think, frame for what I want to share. We're based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a team of 60 and a beautiful conference center where we, for 25 years, have brought groups together for deep dialogue and reflection on tough issues. And we're a big believer in the transformative power of bringing people into, we would say, a sacred space, inviting all of us to go to a deep place. The IRS describes us as an operating foundation. We describe ourselves as an inclusive, spiritually grounded community of love and hope. How's that? We need more of those too. Our mission statement, helping build the spiritual foundation for a loving world, a very hard-headed mission, I would submit. Our big picture take on that, humanity in the early days of the 21st century is becoming more powerful at an astounding rate thanks to our accelerating technology and knowledge. The question is, are we going to use that power constructively or destructively? I think of a statement that's attributed to Einstein. There's so many that are attributed, but this is a good one. Science is like a razor blade in the hands of a 3-year-old. We're the 3-year-old. And this is directly relevant. Think of the role that social media, cable news, big data, virtual artificial intelligence are playing in increasingly reshaping, in many ways not for the better, our civic context. We can't afford to continue to be 3-year-olds unless humanity becomes wiser, more loving, more compassionate, in a way that's, or to a degree that's commensurate with our growing power. We're going to destroy ourselves. And so Fetzer's mission, I would say, goes right to the heart of that challenge. Globally, we do a lot of work to support faith leaders from across traditions in coming together to try to articulate and deepen the spiritual common ground for the global community. Domestically, our top priority commitment is to do our small part in helping to heal the heart of American democracy. And that's why we're here. With that as backdrop, I want to briefly share 3 thoughts, 3 propositions that I think are significant in relation to what we're trying to tackle here. The first is diagnostic, and it's simply that the problem of violent extremism is a cancer that arises from and is fueled by a much deeper and broader social pathology, namely the growing polarization and toxicity of our civic life as a whole. It's a problem like climate change, slow-moving but driven inexorably by deeply entrenched forces. It will get worse and worse unless a critical mass of citizens, we and our fellow citizens, radically change the way we engage in our civic life. If we don't, this is an existential threat. It will ultimately destroy our free society. And our friends in the climate change world talk about radical phase changes, a problem that develops gradually over time until it reaches a certain point, and then things flip radically in the system. We never know when we will hit that point in relation to the unraveling of our civic life. So all of this, I would say, adds up to the hard-headed case for soft strategies, as Mike described them. That is to say, the strategies that focus on the opening of the heart, the building of trust, the bridging of divides. Moving on quickly, my second thought proposition is we're not going to begin to make real progress on depolarizing and detoxifying our civic life until everyone is at the table on an equal footing, committed to respecting the dignity of everyone else, ready to forthrightly share their perspective, but also to listen deeply and be open to being changed by the perspectives of others. I say that because we don't have everybody we need here today. And the most efficient way I can make that point is to say that in November 2016, 63 million of our fellow Americans pulled the lever for President Trump. Now, I'm not going to do it, but if I did ask for a show of hands on who voted for whom, that 63 million Americans would be grossly underrepresented in this room. That matters. Why does it matter? Because they have things to say that we need to hear. Like what? Well, what I've heard from many of my thoughtful conservative friends, that they have experienced, and particularly perhaps conservatives in the social demographics most vulnerable to being recruited for or open to extremist ideologies, they've experienced the last several decades as decades of persistent, sustained cultural and moral aggression by liberal elites and liberal activists. They regularly tell me they have felt like their values have been demeaned, their faith disrespected, their intelligence and moral integrity denied, and their voice diminished. Now, we may not agree, you may not agree, and that would certainly have made our conversation over the last day and a half more challenging, perhaps more conflictual, but I would submit ultimately much more rewarding. What's it going to take to get everybody to the same table? Issuing the invitations is not enough. It's going to take personal relationship building. It's going to take personal outreach by all of us in an authentic, even vulnerable way to win the trust of folks on the other side of all of the polarizing divides. I hope all of us will commit to do that important work. The third and final proposition I want to share is that I think it is critical for all of us, both as individuals and as tribes, to recognize how our own values, biases, and polarization or biases and behaviors are contributing to the polarizing dynamic. As I say, I lived in the progressive advocacy world. I watched us and the other side get better and better at galvanizing our base by demonizing the folks on the other side. And I often was struck by our own blind spots. Just to drive this point home, the liberal policy community and advocacy groups have been enthusiastic to embrace the conceptual frame of implicit bias. One of the great contributions of the social psychology field over the last 2 decades to our understanding the dynamics of social problems. But Jonathan Haidt, who's been in the forefront of that, has made some waves by putting the mirror up to his own profession and saying, first off, show of hands, how many Republicans, how many Democrats? 14 to 1. How many self-identified conservatives? 80%, or liberals, 80%, self-identified conservatives, 4%. What does our own research tell you about the biases that we're bringing to our research that's related to ideological and political behavior? I find that regularly in my conversations with fellow liberals. But let me take it to a deeper spiritual level. And I'll close with a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago that comes up regularly for me in these conversations. And remember who this is. This is an activist who has been on the receiving end of the most repressive state apparatus perhaps that we've seen. He's writing, he's chronicling his experience and the broader experience of others in the Soviet Gulag. One would not be surprised if he had a radical critique of the other. Here's what he says. Gradually, it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between parties either, but right through every human heart. I think that squares with my lived experience, and I think it is powerfully relevant to all of our challenges. He goes on to say, since then I have come to understand the truth of all the religions of the world. They struggle with the evil within a human being. It's impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it is possible to constrict it within each person. We usually come at it from the perspective of opening our hearts in love rather than constricting the evil, but it amounts to the same thing. And the wisdom of all the spiritual traditions says it's central to human flourishing and it's incredibly hard. And all of the traditions have developed spiritual practices, disciplines, communities to help human beings take up that hard and increasingly crucial work of constricting evil and expanding love. I think we have to attack the deep social pathology, the broad social pathology, before we have any real prospect of addressing these problems. Thank you.